So you know those projects that get announced with a big bang, big celebration, everyone's excited, and then there's no delivery? We're not going to mention any names. Sukhoi Su-75, you've kind of been that guy for the last few years. But now we've got some fresh photos that just dropped this week, and it looks to be a potential flyable prototype, and it's just chilling next to the Su-57. It's at a foggy Russian airfield. So is this Russia's budget stealth fighter finally gearing up to finally take off? Today we're breaking it all down: the design, the tech, the drama, and if it would even stand a chance against the F-35 or F-22. So stick around. I've flown F-15E Strike Eagles and F-16s on the Thunderbirds, and I'll be breaking down from my perspective of being a fighter pilot. We'll see if this Su-75 has actually got some real thrust or if it's just a lot of talk. So here's some images. This image shows that Su-75 rolling out to the flight line, cloaked in black. You can see it looks to be a variant of the F-35 prior to those sheets being removed. Definitely has that same type feel with that angled tail and that cockpit design, the way that it flows, just very reminiscent of the F-35. Here's another view straight on. You can kind of see it almost looks like it's going to have those Y intakes like the F-35 has, but we'll get to those intakes here in a second. It shows it out there on the flight line, and it almost looks like it's getting ready to fly. But when you zoom in on the cockpit, it looks to be a slightly different story, seemingly just some sort of a mock-up without an actual real cockpit inside. Maybe there's some sheets inside covering some things up, but it definitely looks like this thing might be all talk. But I'll be breaking it down as if it wasn't, and what it would likely do if it could fly against the F-35 and F-22. So definitely stay to the end of the video for that. So for me, I get pumped up for any jet that looks like it could potentially push the envelope, and I try to look at these jets essentially like they're sports cars, and I'm analyzing them. So to me, the actual design of the Su-75, this is the answer that Russia has given to the F-35. They're saying that it's affordable, it's sneaky, so likely a little bit of stealth worked in, and that it's export ready. Really, they're looking for a jet that can be exported to partner nations, that can help fund and advance the program, to probably help them create a follow-on jet that has a bit more of capability than this Su-75. But just looking at the jet from a broad perspective, I do enjoy the lines, but there's a few key flaws that I want to chat about that likely limit the combat capability of this thing, and likely why it's not being sold. It's not flying off the shelves at all. Basically crickets when they put this thing up for sale. So we'll talk about why that likely is. And then sanctions are biting Russia extremely hard, and that has definitely pushed the timeline way further down the road. And that's likely why the production of this thing is in very desperate need of foreign orders to help that supply chain get moving and to help the supply lines actually generate aircraft. And here's a close-up on that cockpit. So what I really want to highlight to you guys is that big, massive canopy bow. That stands out like a you-know-what in sweatpants, trying to be cool, but basically highlighting itself to the entire world. Radar waves are going to bounce off that canopy bow like no other, and this thing is going to reflect back, basically destroying any stealth from the front quadrant and likely the side quadrant as well. So definitely not a good setup there. And then it almost looks to me like there's no backing of the seat. I mean, it could kind of be blended in, but it almost looks like this is more of a balsa wood mock-up, maybe to just show that this program is still alive, and trying to pitch this to other nations, saying, hey, look, we've got this thing, it's alive and well, you should buy one right now. But seeing that big canopy bow on this thing, to me, is just a huge red flag. And then the fact that the canopy is clear, it doesn't have a lot of the coatings, kind of that golden coating that you would see on the F-22 that refracts radar waves. These radar waves are going to bounce right in, potentially even bounce off objects that are inside the cockpit itself, and that is definitely not the situation you want when you're flying into hostile territory. And the aerospace designers from the nations that could be the customer of this, they likely know that. So very interesting to me that there wasn't some advanced thinking done for this canopy to make sure that it reflected the ability to be a stealthy jet. Okay, so let's start with a design breakdown. So the Su-75, it's a single engine tailless delta wing beast. At least that's what its goal is to be. So think a bit of a sleeker Su-57, basically a light Su-57. It clocks in at about 17 meters long. It's got a wingspan just shy of about 11, so it's a little bit smaller than the Su-57. And here in this image, you can see them sitting next to each other, so you can see that Su-57 is kind of like the tennis court, and I say that lovingly, having flown the F-15E, which is called the tennis court because it's so massive. The Su-57 has that wider look to it, the wider design, whereas the Su-75 looks like a bit more of an hourglass shape, trying to make it look like it's a bit more of a budget aircraft, single engine configuration, and potentially more efficient than the Su-57, just having the ability to be a smaller platform that can carry weapons into combat. Typically that's good because it gives you the option of having more. So if you're generating sorties or you're going up against a massive force, NATO, if you're going up against the US and NATO, you're going to want a lot of jets. So looking at this Su-75, it's built to be more efficient and not have the expenses that you would have on the Su-57. And as you can see, definitely a smaller profile than that Su-57. It doesn't really have a lot of the serrated things that I would expect to see on a radar scattering jet. RCS, there you go, first acronym, radar cross section. They're claiming that it's 0.1 square meters. That would be decent for a light fighter, but that would definitely be more of a highlighted fighter than you would want, especially if you're calling this thing a 5th gen fighter. And they're saying that its payload is pretty massive, somewhere between 10 to 15,000 pounds. And to me, I just don't see it. I don't see this jet being able to carry that much unless you're strapping things to the wings, which we've seen in some of the images. And that to me just totally destroys the stealth. So you might as well not even call it a stealth fighter, just because at that point, when you have pylons on the wings, you're just standing out, you're highlighting yourself, and that's not where you want to be when you're in fighter aviation. But the speed that they're claiming, and that would probably be close, is Mach 1.6 to Mach 2, somewhere in that envelope, and I would guess that that's probably correct. You've likely got about a 1,500 kilometer combat radius on this thing, and that's decent. That's relatively acceptable for a smaller multi-role exported fighter. And here's a top-down view, so looking at that top-down view from the Su-75 on the right to the Su-57 on the left, obviously it's going to be a lot skinnier of a fuselage on the Su-75 just because of the fact that you've got that single engine configuration, and they chose to do a chin take. They chose to put that intake underneath the nose. Chin take, I mean, if I had to say chin take about the fighter jet I was flying, I'd be like, yeah, can we redesign this thing so I don't ever have to say the word chin take again? That would be great. And then the lines on this thing, as you can see on the right-hand side, the Su-75, it's straight out of, to me, Lockheed Martin's playbook. How the fuselage teams up with the horizontal tails, it actually looks pretty nice. It looks relatively sleek. And then you've got those angled out tails, very similar to the F-18 and the F-22. So likely a relatively maneuverable jet for not having thrust vectoring. And then not having thrust vectoring, why is that likely the case? Well, likely it's because the maintenance on the Su-57 has shown Russia that in order to get a force ship of Su-57s airborne in any type of combat configuration, if you're having to maintain the thrust vectoring when you're likely not going to get in a dogfight, or maybe the dogfight potential would be up against a 4th gen fighter or an F-35, do you really need to have thrust vectoring? Because the maintenance that it takes for thrust vectoring is going to be insane. And so exporting this jet to partner nations that might not have the maintenance side doped, you don't want to put them in a position where now they can't fly this jet because the 3D thrust vectoring isn't working. As we've seen the Su-57 shine in Top Gun Maverick with its thrust vectoring going up against Maverick and Rooster, the Su-75 is not going to have that type of maneuverability. It's going to be more on par with like a heavier or an F-16 that would bleed off more energy when it goes into its brake turns and its different parts of the fight. So it's really not meant for that. This is kind of meant for a similar mission of what the F-35 is, and that is deep strike, air interdiction, going in, defensive counter air. So trying to kill the enemy before you get into a merge and you actually get into a dogfight. But I would guess that the maneuverability of this thing wouldn't be too bad. I mean, when I look at the lines on this thing, the ability for it to maneuver is likely pretty good. And a lot of it's going to come down to the thrusties that can come out of that engine. And that's an official term, thrusties. That's a fighter pilot official term, look it up. But if you have the ability to have this jet be sleek, to be efficient, that's going to override the priorities of thrust vectoring. And then I want to show you this picture of the Su-57. So this shows the different rivets that are on that jet. So this might be the T-50, which is a trainer version of the Su-57. They probably make it look a little smoother when it comes to jets that they might actually put in combat. But the fact that the rivets on this thing look like this makes me think, all right, this better be for training, because if you try to take a riveted jet like this into the battle space, it's not going to be a good day. It's essentially going to be that Mission Impossible scene where the parachute's on fire over and over and over again. Every Su-57 pilot's going to be looking across the battle space, just seeing that scene play in their head, and then that scene will live rent-free in their mind for the rest of their life if they go up against some sort of a 5th gen fighter that doesn't have rivets like this and actually has the ability to maintain its stealth profile and not get in a position where it's being spotted and highlighted from 200 plus miles away. But the blended wing body of the Su-75, to me, that echoes the F-35. They're trying to make it not be in a position where it needs the rivets like that Su-57 has. So to me, it looks a little smoother than what the Su-57 has. The Su-75 is likely going to be an update to that. So Russia's really going to want to show potential customers, hey, we're not going to do this riveted thing. That riveted thing, that was us before. We've changed, and it's not gaslighting, we promise. And Russia's likely trying to say, hey, look, the Su-75 can carry a lot of different weapons, so maybe even 5 R-77s or KH-38s. They want it to be as if this thing has the ability to carry a lot of these different weapons, because partner nations are really going to look for that when it comes to this jet. But I want to show you one critical flaw, and that critical flaw to me is that chin take. So looking at this video, you can see the chin take is taking up a lot of the room. There you go, you got a side bay for a missile. I mean, one missile going under there, and then you have to have that back bay for the actual missiles to go in, because you have the chin take where the air is coming in. You can't sacrifice that. The chin take's totally tiny, so not even to mention the fact that it might not even have enough air to get this jet to do really anything. To me, this is a mock-up where they're gonna have to extend the size of that chin take, but the fact that they have the chin take means that now you can't put weapons up there in the front, kind of like how the F-35 weapons bays stretch across the entire fuselage. This one has to have that side weapons bay right there, which to me is just kind of niche. Like, you've got big side weapons bays that only carry one missile each. So, okay, yeah, if you want this thing to be a one and done, no one likes the one and done, dude. But at the same time, if you got to get the missiles in there somewhere, because the intake is taking up all that belly room, then at some point you got to do what they did. And that's why they have that side missile bay that opens up and then fires. To me, way better of a design on the F-35, where you have those S serpentine type intakes that flow in. So then you have a lot more space underneath the belly to actually put the weapons in there. And they're touting this thing at only being about $30 million a pop. So that's about half, maybe a third of the cost of the F-35. But what do you sacrifice? Does that mean you've got less weapons, less of an ability to be stealthy? Is it really worth it? But they're definitely pitching this to buyers like India or Algeria, who want stealth without having their banks essentially heisted. Because for them, thinking of buying a $100 million F-35 for one a pop, it's essentially like they feel like they're in Ocean's 11 themselves. And then here's a nice close-up of that jet itself, so you can see the chin take. I mean, it's got a little more depth than what maybe some of the other photos show off, so it might have a bit of airflow that gives it the ability to fly and take off. But what performance degradation are you going to have with a small intake like that? You can see on the Su-57 the intakes, both of those intakes coming in. Essentially, one of those Su-57 intakes to me looks bigger than the Su-75, so that's going to be a real issue that the designers are going to have to look at. And you can see the intakes on the Su-35 here for comparison in this image, how big those things are. When you're operating at high AOA regimes where there's not a lot of air being sucked in, you've got to have the ability to have massive hoovering intakes, and that's one of the key parts of any fighter that's extremely maneuverable, and a fighter that prevents itself from having compressor stalls, because if you're in a dogfight, you have a compressor stall, you've got one engine, it's not going to end well. And that's why we see such big intakes on the Su-35 here. The fact that this thing is built to be a maneuverable aircraft, they know it needs to get the air, and at this point, to me, it looks a bit like the chin take is choking off a fighter that could actually be a tactical fighter for Russia. But what could the mission be? So I would think a light tactical aircraft would be focusing on air superiority patrols, precision strikes, even potentially trying to sync this thing up with some of Russia's drones, even though Russia's drone techniques is to just do a massive amount of those Shahed 136 style drones. So whether they're working on something like a CCA that's comparable to Anduril's CCA, the Fury, the fact that that thing can link up and sync up with 5th and 6th generation fighters potentially is a step that is just massive. So could the Su-75's avionics actually be at a point where it could link up with CCAs? That might be something they're pitching, but to me, I would likely think that's not as big of a focus for them, since some of the partner nations might not be there with the drones and the systems that they would be able to maintain and update. And then the avionics look like they run on a unified glass cockpit display with potential, some rumors have said, some AI assists for workload. So think maybe them trying to incorporate some sort of voice commands, some predictive targeting. All right, so let's talk about some hypothetical scenarios about how the Su-75 could be used. So scenario 1 would be over the Baltic skies. 4 NATO F-35s from Poland tangle up with Su-75 squadrons. BVR opens up at somewhere around 100 nautical miles. The F-35's AN/APG-81 lights them up. The sensor fusion sharing between the F-35s with their Link 16 cannot be competed with the Su-75s. The Su-75s spot them late. The RCS of the Su-75 stands out to the F-35, and the Lightning's definitely got the edge. AIM-120s ripple off the F-35s. Some of the checkmates may evade with their Mach 2 being able to turn and get out of there. A few of them are going to eat a missile. I would say likely 3 out of the 4 of these Su-75s would be turning into cheese graters and falling to the earth. If they actually got into a merge, the Su-75's agility would shine, I think, based on the design of this jet. But the F-35's DAS gives it a 360-degree view, and the helmet can cue off AIM-9X's off-bore sight. That totally reduces pilot workload, and the F-35 has AI integrated into some of its targeting packages. The Checkmate's going to be the low end of the totem pole on this one. So the outcome to me, likelihood of about an 80% chance of those F-35s take down 4 out of 4 of those Su-75s when it comes to a within visual range dogfight. Scenario number 2, I like to call this a Pacific patrol. So there's 2 Raptors airborne, and they spot 3 Su-75s that are backing up some Chinese operations. The F-22s have super crews, and they're up at 50,000 feet. They spot the Su-75s before the Su-75s even know they're there. The Su-75s have a rough idea from some airborne and early warning control centers telling them a general direction of where the Raptors might be. The Su-75s push it up. They try to launch their cruise missiles. However, they realize that they're being targeted by the F-22s, and it's too late. The F-22s unleash a volley of AIM-120s. 8 of those AIM-120s are off, headed for these checkmates. 2 for each of them. At the end of the day, those Su-75s never had a chance. And then within the dogfight, the Raptors' thrust vectoring are essentially going to be the worst nightmare of the Su-75. The Raptors are going to roll in like demons and slay these Su-75s, and it's not going to be pretty. A Su-75 survives the initial merge and tries to get out of there. They try to separate from the fight by plugging their jet into Max Afterburner, but at the end of the day, they're no match for that F-22. And that F-22 is going to chase them down and hit them with an AIM-9X, and it's going to be game over. So guys, as you can see, these Su-75s, although a good effort, to me, they're not going to compete with the F-35 and the F-22. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Very interesting what these new photos show us. Will the Su-75 be flying anytime soon? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And hey, the best compliment you can give me is just watch this video right here. When you watch this video right here, it helps the channel out a lot, and I would just greatly appreciate it. So I'll see you on this video right here. This is Ryan, also known as Max Afterburner, signing off.